And because I didn't introduce myself the first time, please forgive me. I am Denise Harris. I would like to next introduce our next speaker. Her name is Miss Holly Webster. Holly is a staff attorney at South Carolina Legal Services. She graduated from Syracuse University in 2019, and she was admitted into the South Carolina Bar in September of 2020. And primarily, Holly focuses on the area of housing justice and low-income tenant rights. In 2022, Holly was selected to be an Equal Justice Works Housing Justice Program Fellow, where she provides direct legal representation to low-income tenants facing evictions in upstate South Carolina. If you will hold all your questions again to the end, Holly will give you enough time to ask questions. And if you would please join me in welcoming Ms. Holly Webster.
Hi, everyone. So as Ms. Denise said, my name is Holly Webster. I'm a staff attorney. I work at the Greenville office for South Carolina Legal Services with Mark. As also previously stated, I provide direct legal representation to low-income tenants facing eviction, and I'm also an Equal Justice Works Housing Justice Program Fellow. So I was asked to talk about evictions in South Carolina. Where are we? And as my title states, I'm sure we're all aware from either personal or professional experience that eviction is a clear problem. Evictions are a clear problem in South Carolina, but they're very difficult to quantify. And so some may be thinking, well, what about the public index? And awesome. Well, I'll start with the public index. If you look at the public index, yes, you see when an eviction action is filed, but just because an eviction action is filed doesn't necessarily mean that the tenant who is a party in the case, the defendant, was actually evicted. So first, starting with the action, even when an action is filed and a landlord prevails in the eviction action, it doesn't always equate to the tenant actually being evicted. Just from experience, I've seen some cases, not a lot, but some, where the landlord will prevail in the eviction hearing, but they don't end up filing a writ of ejectment. And so in those cases, obviously the tenant wasn't evicted, even when you look at the public index and see that the action was found, the court found in favor of the plaintiff. In another example, looking at the public index, is when a landlord files a writ of ejectment. I've seen some cases where the landlord files a writ of ejectment and it's before the eviction hearing. I don't see these often, but in some cases that happens. And so when you look at the public index at a specific case, you'll see that a writ of ejectment was filed, but maybe in that case the landlord did not prevail at the eviction hearing, and so the tenant was not actually evicted regardless of how it may look looking at the public index. Another example is incomplete public index records. A lot of eviction actions go through each court. It's not uncommon to look in the public index and see an incomplete record. And with that, you aren't really sure if the defendant actually responded within the 10-day period after being served with the writ of ejectment. You don't know if there was a hearing in some cases. You don't know who prevailed, if a writ was ever filed. So it just leaves that really unclear as to whether an actual eviction took place. And then, of course, vague outcomes. So rarely ever, but sometimes I'll see in the public index that an action is marked disposed, but there's no indication of who the court found in favor of and whether a writ was filed. And so that's another example of when it's unclear about whether an actual eviction took place when looking at the public index. But even outside of the public index, what about those evictions that take place without court involvement? And I'm talking about unlawful ousters, and they're illegal, hence the word unlawful, but they happen, and those aren't found in the public index. There's no record of those in the public index, and I'm doubtful that there's a record of those anywhere, but so that's what makes it difficult to quantify evictions. And when I say unlawful ousters, I'm talking about the landlord changing the locks, throwing out the tenant's belongings, shutting off the power, the water. And in some cases, the landlord and the tenant may not realize this is illegal, and the tenant and their family, they move and feel like they have no choice but to dip, considering the circumstances. And so that in itself is considered an eviction too. But there's no record of that. And so in looking at what makes it difficult to quantify evictions, what information do we have? Well, as mentioned earlier, we have the public index. So we have the Eviction Lab and Legal Services Corporation that collect data, collect information, gather that information so that we can get an idea, get a number of eviction actions filed in South Carolina. And so just starting with South Carolina, the Eviction Lab had an estimate of around 164,000 eviction actions filed in 2016, an estimate of around 156,000 eviction actions filed in 2017, around 152,000 eviction actions filed in 2018 in South Carolina as a whole. Looking at it, it's apparent there's a decrease between 2016 and 2018. I'm not really sure what that's about. If anyone has any ideas, I'd love to talk about that with you after this presentation. And we'll see that consistent pattern throughout this presentation. And then moving on to 2019, Legal Services Corporation had an estimate of around 151,203 eviction actions filed in South Carolina as a whole, and then a decrease in the number of eviction actions filed in 2020. We're down to 85,141 eviction actions. This one's not, the decrease between 2019 and 2020, it's not too much of a mystery considering that was the start of the pandemic. And in South Carolina specifically, we had the statewide evictions order by the Supreme Court that temporarily halted evictions starting in March of 2020 and ending in May of 2020. And and then we also had the CARES Act eviction moratorium that temporarily halted evictions under specified circumstances for tenants in covered housing, subsidized properties from March 27th of 2020 to July 24th of 2020. And then of course the CDC eviction moratorium that temporarily halted evictions under specified circumstances for tenants in all types of housing between September 4th of 2020 through January 31st of 2021. But then of course after 2020, looking at South Carolina as a whole, we see a decrease in the number of eviction actions filed in 2021, and then an increase in 2022, and a continued increase in 2023, and obviously we're progressing through 2024. So whether the numbers will continue to rise in South Carolina as a whole, that's a mystery. Interested to see how it looks after this year, whether the numbers have increased, if they start to decrease or stay around what it was in 2023. And then looking at Greenville County, looking at the upstate, specifically Greenville County, Eviction Lab had around 15,000 eviction actions filed in 2016, and then around 14,000 eviction actions filed in 2017 and 2018. So again, we see that decrease in the number of eviction actions filed. And then 2019, we see again that decrease between 2019 and 2020, which, the moratoriums. So that pretty much explains that to a certain degree. But then we see an increase in 2021 in the number of eviction actions filed, and an increase as well as 2022, but then we see a decrease of the number of eviction actions filed in 2023. Moving to the Midlands, now specifically Richland County, we once again see that decrease in the number of eviction actions filed between 2016 and 2018. And then looking at Legal Services Corporation, that same decrease between 2019 and 2020. An increase in the number of eviction actions filed in Richland County in 2021, and then a continued increase through 2023 in Richland County. And then moving over to the Low Country, specifically Charleston County, we see around 24,000 eviction actions filed in 2016. That same decrease between 2016 and 2018 that I mentioned previously with Greenville County and Richland and then South Carolina as a whole. And that same decrease between 2019 and 2020. Here we have a decrease in 2021 in the number of eviction actions filed in Charleston County, and then an increase through 2023. So once again, there's that mystery of what's going to happen when data's collected, the records are collected, and a number, they come up with a number with Legal Services Corporation as far as 2024 goes. So just to recap on the patterns that I've pointed out to y'all today, there's a decrease in the number of eviction actions that were filed across the board. That's a mystery to me. Like I said before, if anybody has any ideas as to why that was the case between 2016 and 2018, would love to talk about that after this presentation. The drop in numbers between 2019 and 2020 was consistent across the board, like I mentioned, the moratoriums. And then 2021 and from 2021 to 2023 we saw a difference where in Greenville County the numbers increased in 2021 and then decreased after 2021. And then in Richland County the numbers increased consistently through 2023. And then in South Carolina as a whole, and specifically Charleston County, we saw the numbers decrease in 2021 and then increase through 2023. And then, of course, like I said before, 2024 is still a mystery. Only time will tell. But what does all this information tell us? Well, I mean, in taking into consideration where I talked about the lack of clarity as far as what actual evictions took place, regardless of the number of eviction actions filed, I would say we have a pretty big problem. I mean, it's difficult to solve a problem if you aren't entirely sure how many evictions actually took place. So, when we talk about issues like evictions, it's a lot easier to narrow in on a solution to a problem when you have a set number for that issue. But here we're still trying to figure it out. So what can we do with the information that we do have, the information I presented in today's presentation? Well, one thing we can do that we're hopefully going to do throughout this event is talk about it, and hopefully afterwards as well. you can't really solve a problem if you don't talk about it. I'm not necessarily saying that talking about it will make the problem go away, but awareness is a pretty good start to solving an issue. Correcting misinformation. I would say that one that I mentioned earlier, it's really important for both landlords and tenants to be aware that self-help evictions, unlawful ousters are legal, that legal evictions are done through the court. Some issues, can be dealt with without an action being filed. I've seen some cases where the issue stemmed from a miscommunication, a misunderstanding, a miscalculation. I've seen it just from practicing in this area. I see it not all the time, but every now and then you'll see that this could have been dealt with without an action to begin with. So the reason why I say that is just I think there's been a misunderstanding on both sides. I've heard landlords and tenants alike express this misunderstanding about if an issue is resolved after an action is filed, that everything is squared away and everything gets wiped out, and that's just not the case. In fact, even when you get that sigh of relief on both ends, where we come to an agreement, we've worked it out, we let the court know that we're not moving forward with this hearing, even then the eviction action still remains on that tenant's record. And like I said, I've seen both landlords and tenants express the belief that if we work it out, it'll just go away, it's completely fine. That's not the case. Even working through the eviction process, honestly, after an eviction action is filed, regardless of what decision is made, whether an outcome is in favor of the tenant, regardless of that, it's still on their record. So just moving through the process, a tenant served with the rule to vacate, they have that 10-day period to either request a hearing or vacate. If they vacate, it's still on their record. If they request a hearing, it's still on their record. They go to a hearing, they prevail, it's still on their record. They don't prevail, they file an appeal. Now there's 2 actions on their record. Even if they prevail on appeal, it's still on their record. And so really the best outcome is for the matter to be resolved without an eviction action. But that's ideal, that's ideal. It doesn't always happen, and it's not always the case. But one of the ways that we could make it the case in some situations is to share community resources. I think that landlords and tenants alike could really benefit from just being aware of the resources, being aware of the organizations and agencies that are out there. There are a lot of agencies that our office is aware of, and I'm sure a lot of you are a part of those agencies or aware of those agencies that can provide rental assistance, utility assistance in some cases. There are some that may help with covering an application fee or help people find more affordable housing options, and exchanging those resources. We've worked with South Carolina Legal Services has worked with organizations that have their own resource list or their own affordable housing option list that they've shared with people coming for assistance with other things like rental assistance, and then they get a list of affordable housing options at the same time. So just communicating and familiarizing yourself with those people that are part of those agencies out there that are really trying to help alleviate this issue, and also outreach events and community networking and community partnerships are all really, really important. And maybe they're not going to wipe out this issue altogether, and I understand there's way more to it than just this, but I'm just speaking to y'all just to see what we can do as a community. And so Mark obviously had a lot of our South Carolina Legal Services information and our social media presence, but I just wanted to include up here, just highlight or reemphasize, I guess. We have our YouTube channel, we have a resource page on our website with organizations that we know that really are helpful and super important in our community, and as well as our online classrooms that go through the eviction process, if we're looking specifically at this issue, but also other areas that people may need more guidance and assistance through. And then, of course, there's our office too. So yeah, does anyone have any questions? Oh.
First of all, Holly, thank you so much for the presentation and also just for your hard work in this space. Two questions for you. So obviously having this be more opaque for both tenants and for landlords is really dilutive to trying to find a better solution, as you noted. What is the legal apparatus that's really the barrier to having more clarity on this front? Is it at the state level? Is it more county level? And then for landlords, what, just from your perspective working in the space, what is the most effective way you see for landlords to engage in advocacy to really try to try to advocate for more transparency versus more, muddled waters around evictions in general?
So for the first question, just for clarification, are you asking what makes it difficult for landlords and tenants to?
Well, why is there not more clarity around? You listed, kind of the many different ways kind of evictions are not clear or really are not crystal clear to landlords or to those seeing basically prior eviction history. I'm just wondering, it would only help landlords if it was more clear, and I would imagine, help this general space become just more clear for everyone. Like legally at the state level or at the county level, what are the barriers to having more clarity around this action led to this led to a true eviction, this led to it being dropped? Why is it not more clear in terms of the outcome?
So let me know if I'm not answering your question fully. So I will say that I think when it comes to the process and it not being clear, it's if you're not aware of resources available, like for like I had previously, our online classroom walks through the eviction process. So, and we also have our YouTube channel that talks about the eviction process and, other housing issues. And so I think it's just a matter of being aware of the resources for both landlords and tenants, because, if you don't know how many options you have, you go with the one that's presented in front of you, that's, right in front of your face, versus maybe trying to figure out a way to resolve the issue, which maybe you're limited because you aren't really sure how else you can go about dealing with this issue outside of filing an action.
How could we as a state really have more clarity? What are the steps to having exact clarity on that number every year?
I really wish I knew, because I think like I mentioned, the unlawful ousters, I have no idea. If we could have like a little birdie that was like posted everywhere someone ever rented a place, that could like come back and keep tabs on what they're witnessing. I think that's the problem, is a lot of times a tenant may not take any action after they're ousted unlawfully because they don't know that it's legal. And so that may not even make it to our office. We may not even like hear about this. And so there's a bunch of people who probably don't even realize that what they went through was not okay. That's not allowed. And so I think that's what makes it really difficult. I think even with the public index, maybe we could go through the records and get clarification and try to follow up. But even if we did that with the unlawful ousters, it just keeps it a mystery. And I have no idea how we'd be able to get a record of those.
And does the unlawful ousters, is that for tenants that have a lease, or is that also folks that might be living with my brother, and he said it was okay for me to live there, but then I get like a notice to quit, I believe it's called, Judge Duckett said. And so is that in that category, and does that contribute to that ambiguity around the crystallized number?
So landlords, or I guess even without a written lease, there could still be that landlord-tenant relationship. But even so, the proper way to eject someone is through the court.
Got it. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any kind of legislation to perhaps help a tenant in terms of their rent was $500, and all of a sudden their rent jumps from $500 to $900? you know, because the landlord, this is one of the most desirable areas in South Carolina. It goes up, but the tenant only get $943 a month. So therefore, leading to homelessness and eviction, which, you know, you've already stated that that eviction can be on your record from now to 30 years later. And it just seems so unfair. I mean, we need to try to be an advocate for low-income people, because to this very day, no one can tell me what's affordable housing. Affordable for me may not be affordable for you. So, I mean, you know, as concerned people, we need to try to figure this out, because our homeless situation in South Carolina is just getting worse and worse every day.
Yeah, it is. And honestly, I mean, that begs the question, you know, what type of housing is it? Where is it located? What is the market value? You know, there's so many questions that I have when you pose that. But I agree that there needs to be something that's done, but it's also it's almost like, yeah, evictions, you know, may seem like the same story, but everyone's story is so different. They're all at different types of housing, you know, federally subsidized housing, it could be private housing. I mean, there are a lot of factors to take into consideration when trying to answer that question, but also solve the problem too. So.
I have a question. To your left. No, that's to your right, You know, I work in housing too, and I'm new to it, so we're learning the eviction process. And for you to say that you don't, it's not clear why you are not getting the numbers, you know, we have to find a way to have accurate numbers. But I know some of the problems that we are experiencing is the breakdown in the communication, and that's on the city level and the landlord. The timelines are not clear. We're learning, and I have to say Greenville Human Relations has been an asset, and, you know, to help us learn and make sure we're following protocol. And I found out recently that when you say some, you know, just knowing the results, well, we had an issue, she filed an appeal, now we have to go through an arbitration. My question is, why an arbitration if the person hadn't paid rent in 6 months? We have to go through arbitration. And they haven't paid rent in 6 months. You know, so just things like that, the process, there's a breakdown in the process. And if I worked in that capacity, I would get frustrated too and say, forget these numbers. Because it's things like that is what can be a deterrent. If we don't go to arbitration, I'm like, well, we just gonna forget about that one. And we need to work, when we talk about working together to resolve this issue, this is a holistic issue. You know, these households are not making the money to afford to live in Greenville, in the state of South Carolina. You know, and the wages are not going up, but the rents are. I keep it and I make sure it's a practice. In fact, I fight with my board at times because according to HUD, anything over 30% is not affordable. But we take a loss because of that. But I refuse to, you know, I won't do it any other way. Because, I mean, that's what we do. We do affordable housing. But it's not easy. And the funding that we receive, you know, there's a lot of bias in that. I don't want to get started.
No, you're good. You're
Because
fine. You're perfectly fine.
my car is parked in that circle.
Oh my
And look,
goodness. Well, I'm still.
I
happy
can't hardly
you
walk
know.
around here. I definitely can't walk there easily. But I
appreciate
hope I get an opportunity, you know, with just some of the issues that have came up, that we get some answers. Because it's challenging.
I hope so too, and I'm glad you took the time to speak, even though, you know, you're your car. Thank you anyway.
Mine is more of a statement, I guess, than a question. Like everybody said, we do need a clear understanding about eviction because it's just not fair. And then my thing is from experience, and I'm speaking from experience, why go to court and win if I'm still gonna have evictions on my rental history? I feel like I'm being victimized all over again. So what's the process, the purpose, not the process, the purpose of even going to court if I'm still got evictions on my record and I won?
Well, and that's a good point because even with a positive outcome, it can still be difficult to find other housing because, I mean, in some, if you look at the public index, if you don't actually click specifically on a case, sometimes you don't even see what the outcome was. You just see that it ruled a vacate action was filed against this person. And so it's tough because, of course, you know, you would go because you don't want to be evicted. You want to try and defend yourself against this eviction action. At this time, so as stated before, I'm an Equal Justice Works Housing Justice Program fellow, but other fellows, and especially in the Columbia area, are trying to make eviction expungements a thing in South Carolina. So hopefully that gives some people hope. There's not a clear path at this time. I have heard of some cases. I remember I was a part of a housing court in Columbia not too long ago. I was subbing for somebody. That was exciting. But I was able to get someone's, like, I think it was the record sealed and like just their initials on the case. But just to have it expunged is something that we're looking forward to. It's not yet a thing in South Carolina, but just for anyone else who may have that question, be it you or anybody else that you know who's wondering the same thing, because I get that. That makes sense. I mean, you're going through all this, you get a good outcome, but it's bittersweet because it's still on your record. Hopefully that changes. Hopefully it changes very soon. I'm hoping, you know, especially, you know, like how you said before. So just keep an eye out for that moving forward, and we'll see where that goes. Because it exists in other states, so there's no reason why it shouldn't exist in South Carolina.
So is there some kind of legislation here for the House to change it?
So I'm not as well versed in specifically what they put out there. I just know I have fellows who are working on it now, and other advocates across South Carolina who are pushing to make eviction expungements exist in South Carolina. It's not my project with Equal Justice Works, but I am aware that they are fighting for that now, currently.
So how would you keep up with it to see if it's going to become reality?
I would just look it up. I mean, no, not, you know, like look it up, you know, if there's any reports, articles on updates is what I mean, just to keep up with those and see, you know, how we're progressing with that.
Who is the main entity?
Excuse me, she's been waiting.
Okay, so we talked earlier, we talked about the eviction. So I'm really speaking from a tenant standpoint, just from phone calls that we received. Ms. Harris brought to our attention about the notice to vacate versus eviction. So being a tenant, you are approached by your landlord or your property management company, and they're letting you know that they're getting ready to file an eviction. Okay, now as the tenant, do you have the ability, what would you do in that situation, either before or in the process? Would you contact a lawyer? Would you reach out to human relations, or would you go to court and go through the eviction process and potentially actually get the eviction on there? Now that you know you have the right, or there is a other option other than eviction, what should tenants do in that situation?
Well, so those are all options that are open for a tenant to decide what would be best in their situation, because, you know, why are they getting that notice to vacate? What are they wanting to leave and just need more time? Are they wanting to stay and get this worked out? I mean, like I said, there's so many factors that come into play with answering that question. But I definitely, like I said before, I'm in the camp that if you can get it resolved without an eviction action on your record to begin with, that's goals. Because, I don't know if you said your name earlier. Like Quintoria said, even if you prevail, you have a strong case, it's still on your record as of right now. So it's ideal to see if it can be worked out. And sometimes, you may need to get a representative to speak for you. Maybe that will assist you in trying to work it out, because I've seen cases where I was able to help someone and negotiate with the landlord without an action on the person's record and work it out. And it was just a matter of maybe there's a lot of tension beyond just the landlord-tenant relationship. Maybe they're family, maybe they're friends, or they were friends. So there's more of emotional tension between the two parties, and just bringing someone in who's not emotionally tense may help that situation. So you could do, all of those are options. It's just a matter of that person's specific situation.
Okay, we gotta move on.
Oh.
She's gonna be here. You'll
I'll be here.
See her one-on-one, and that is probably be much better for
Okay.
you. That's great. Oh, why y'all laughing? Okay. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you very much.